Chapter 13.
At last, said my American lawyer, who looked like a grown-up, overly groomed Cupid, please sign this. He was making his way toward me at the customs counter, through a crowd of people, family, friends, and journalists, and held out a stack of papers. But what is this? I asked impatiently. My lawyers often irritate me, even when they're charming and necessary. But this time, I was genuinely annoyed. I was eager to speak to my loved ones, who were hungrily waiting for news. It had already been several hours since the plane landed, followed by a skirmish with a legion of photographers, and now I had to wait again. The American habit of processing foreigners last during entry formalities, calling them in alphabetical order, was especially exhausting for someone like me, whose last name begins with S. I'm always among the last, and it wears on my patience and makes me feel diminished. These are your citizenship papers, the lawyer explained. I've taken care of everything, it'll be finalized quickly. I stared at him, stunned and unsure of what he meant. Why change my citizenship again? I had become French. Why was yesterday's decision acceptable, but suddenly not today? Of course, many frantic refugees were fighting desperately for such documents. Becoming American was no easy feat. But now, with France defeated, the idea of switching nationalities tasted of betrayal. Put those papers in your safe, I told the lawyer. You've chosen the worst possible moment, I added, then turned away to embrace Gogo and Barry, my son-in-law. When you have an only child and you've poured most of your life and affection into them, especially when they've grown up without a father, as in my case, it's hard not to be intensely attached. The poor young man who takes that child from you and fills their heart with new love and purpose finds himself in a delicate, complicated position, and one can only feel sympathy for him. Barry immediately deployed his full charm to win me over and overcome my natural distrust. It still took several years before, one evening over a glass of wine, I admitted to him, yes, I was tough on you in the beginning, no question. But now, Barry, I must say, your marriage brings me happiness. I've come to love you as a son. And it was true, a real friendship grew between us. During the small disagreements that inevitably arise in families, I always took his side. The first weeks in New York were exhausting. I barely had a moment to feel or think. Everywhere I went, people asked the same questions, partly curious, partly sympathetic. And one question kept coming up, which I couldn't answer. How did you manage to get out? But New York was no longer the New York I had known. The America I once loved, the places I frequented, had changed. The city had been flooded with people from every corner of the world, people of all backgrounds, who had left everything behind out of fear, or because war had made life at home impossible. Some had managed to bring a great deal with them, others worked just to get by, and a few made no effort to hide their wealth. For those arriving from France, where, despite political divisions, there had been only one enemy, the Boche, it was difficult to grasp the divisions in America. It was confusing. It felt like returning to Renaissance Florence, where the Guelphs and Ghibellines stirred hatred, turning families against one another, inflaming hearts and speeches. A kind of civil distrust walled people off from those who had once been their allies. In New York, suspicion hung in the air, vague and unsettling. A well-known journalist, supposedly a friend of France and a guest of American hospitality and honors, had written an article calling France the brothel of the world. For that, she was later awarded the Legion of Honor. She wore not only the ribbon but the medal itself for a long time. At one banquet, I noticed my neighbor no longer wore the Legion of Honor medal, which he'd once been given out of courtesy and gratitude. I couldn't resist saying, "You're missing something," as I placed a rose petal on his lapel. He later returned to France to purchase designs, but never came to my office. Such was the state of mind among some Americans, poisoned by snobbery or misinformation. At a formal evening event in one of New York's most elegant clubs, Cartier offered a magnificent diamond brooch for auction, the proceeds to benefit French children. I was asked to lead the bidding. The room was filled with wealthy people of various nationalities. Yet when I opened the auction, an awkward silence fell. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," I prompted, "shall we begin?" Still, no one moved. The indifference might have gone on indefinitely if not for a sudden voice. $1,000. It was an Englishman. Despite the prevailing hostility in the room, the atmosphere shifted. People stirred, more bids followed, and the auction quickly reached a respectable amount. But outside the club, a group had gathered, clearly hired agitators, ready to hurl rotten eggs and tomatoes at anyone raising money to feed children. Feeding children had become, apparently, a criminal act. It's worth remembering. The French are unlike any other people. Americans and the British take pride in their nationality, the French complain about theirs. They criticize their countrymen and the very nation they adore. The freedom of speech they enjoy is both a gift and a curse, spontaneous, sometimes brilliant, and at other times completely inappropriate. Regardless, the atmosphere in America shook me deeply. After such emotional strain, I needed peace, a chance to return to myself, to recover my rhythm of life. I rented a tiny, hidden house on a large Long Island estate and went to live there alone. Sometimes the children came to visit, but mostly I was alone, and solitude is the best medicine for sorrow. But how does one describe this kind of sorrow? A cold grief without a name spreads through the chest like lead, numbing the body and planting the feeling that one is utterly useless. I swam, dug for clams for lunch, boiled shrimp, and walked through the forest at night, the American forest, ablaze with autumn colors. Lying flat on the bare ground, I searched for strength and courage. I prayed for a sign, some guidance on what direction to take. My conscience tormented me. It never stops you from acting or making mistakes, but it ensures you'll regret them and keeps you from seeing the results clearly. It's like the old Italian custom of pouring a layer of oil on top of wine, to keep it safe from cork and air. I retreated into my shell and realized what I had to do. My partners in the perfume business, seeing how distraught I was, proposed a business trip to South America to lift my spirits. And so, quickly, always quickly, I boarded yet another plane and took flight. I visited Panama, which felt like a sprawling international bazaar, and Mexico City, where nothing appears to be what it really is, where Spaniards and Aztecs blur together like a marketplace. The most surreal moment I experienced in Mexico happened during a bullfight. Suddenly, the skies opened. Not just a normal downpour, no, this was a biblical flood, like Niagara Falls crashing down from the heavens. We were in a covered box, and still, the water rose to our knees. Meanwhile, spectators in the open stands tore off their clothes and draped them over their heads for protection, and the bullfight continued as if nothing had happened, before a crowd that now looked like a live advertisement for underwear. Peru. I loved Peru. The president's wife came to greet me personally at the airport and, with remarkable warmth, offered the entire country to me, as if it were mine to explore. She introduced me to everyone of interest, arranged a performance of ancient Peruvian ballet in my honor, a mesmerizing, unexpected spectacle. Later, when I saw the Broadway musical The King and I in New York, starring Gertrude Lawrence and Yul Brynner, the children's dance reminded me vividly of Peru. I had no doubt anymore about the deep, mysterious connection between Asia and this part of South America, where Chinese heritage met Latin American tradition. That dance was both passionate and dignified, like a prehistoric coromandel. From Arequipa, I took a tiny, unbelievable train up into the mountains toward Cuzco, so slow it felt like it was being dragged uphill by sleepy cows. It stopped every minute at tiny stations where crowds of people mingled with llamas who stared at me through the dusty glass with enormous, ancient eyes. The landscape was dominated by sandy hues, sometimes lit by flickers of my beloved, shocking pink. It confirmed a timeless truth: there is nothing new under the moon. The journey continued to Lake Titicaca, where boats are made from rough woven reeds, and the women cover themselves from head to toe like those in the Middle East, their faces hidden behind black scarves. They move with grandeur, swaying in huge skirts of vibrant colors. Children are born crouched in corners like birds laying eggs. Cuzco itself is primitive, impersonal, indifferent. On Sundays, the bare church, like a hangar whitewashed in lime, takes on the look of a painting. Mayors from neighboring villages gather there, draped in heavy black cloth with silver chains around their necks. The market sells countless fetishes, Little charms and lead are silver-shaped like homes or animals, wrapped in tiny cloth pouches and kept close to the heart to bring luck or fulfill a wish. Inside the church, a crude organ made from rough-hewn wood is operated by a man who pulls thick ropes like a bell ringer. In a far corner, I saw a vision that stunned me. A group of men and boys, dressed in brown and black, stood at a white wall blowing into massive conch shells, creating an eerie music to accompany the believers' choir. All around the church, on rocky cliffs, were mounds upon mounds of large and small seashells, white, gray, even pale pink, left behind by the sea thousands of years ago. Thousands? Tens of thousands? No wonder the peasants and llamas gaze out with such detachment. Here, the presence of humanity seems almost irrelevant. Then came Chile, a beautiful, gentle country. After leaving Viña del Mar, which reminded me of the Crescent in Cannes, I ascended once more to high altitudes in the Andes. As our plane flew above the jagged mountains, knowing full well there could be no emergency landing, I caught sight of a great statue of Christ rising above a peak. It brought to mind a famous Italian children's book, From the Apennines to the Andes, about a poor little Italian orphan who sets off across the sea, alone and penniless, to conquer Argentina. After many marvelous and moving adventures, he becomes a millionaire. Our aircraft began descending slowly, like a feather in free fall, toward the Argentinian plains and Buenos Aires. The city felt like Paris in 1900, with residential districts resembling Avenue Victor Hugo and commercial streets laid out like butcher's cases filled with fresh veal. Definitely not the place for a woman to live. From there, I flew to Brazil, enchanted by its mystical forests and its famous Sugarloaf Mountain. In Brazil, I found old friends, among them Sir Noel Charles, who had helped me during my campaign for vitamins. He rode in a remarkable Rolls-Royce, a car that had served the embassy for many years. Its body was made of glass, and I had the uncanny feeling that I was a queen being paraded for public display. Louis Jouvet and his theater troupe were performing nightly to full houses with enormous success. He had brought all the stage sets with him, a heroic feat, especially considering the intricate designs by Pavel Cheliciu for Ondine, the play by Giraudoux. The main attraction was Madeleine Ozure, extraordinary in the role of Ondine. One night, she outdid herself, dancing for us on the beach, clothed only in a mist of gauze, like an elfin spirit. Jouvet had hoped to bring his troupe to North America, but in the end, only he and Madeleine were granted visas. He was offered a lucrative contract in Hollywood, but refused, unwilling to abandon his company. Then I left, flying low over the forests, close enough to see monkeys, parrots, wild orchids, an eruption of blossoms, and the impossibly wide mouth of the Amazon River, a true flowering of life. Next, I returned to New York, where I found something to occupy me that involved more than just business. At that time, my professional affairs were going well and gave me the desire to use my energies in a broader, more meaningful way. During this period, Schiap received many offers to head up new fashion ventures and businesses. But she couldn't accept. Had she completely distanced herself from couture, she would have found herself in a terribly strange position. She declined every offer, even the most tempting ones, and continued to wait, without profit or reward, simply out of a sense of duty to the house of fashion on the Place Vendôme. It was the only tribute she could offer, not to compete, not even with the smallest remaining fragment of activity still going on there. I was never drawn to working with charitable committees, not because I lacked concern, but because, sadly, these groups were never free of political influence. Two major associations emerged, both with similar goals, yet suspicious and hostile toward one another. One was called Free France, the other, founded and directed by Anne Morgan, was American Aid to France. I was lucky to collaborate with extraordinary women. It just so happened that I worked alongside them in organizing Aid, Anne Moran and her secretary Guillaume, Isabella Kemp, Kathleen Hales, Therese Bonney, and Florence Conrad. These names are not well enough known. There were others, yes, but these women formed the true core of goodwill and understanding. They were capable of forgetting themselves as few others could. They were marked by a touching modesty, a rare capacity for compassion, and above all, a deep, unwavering devotion to a country many already considered lost, France. Isabella Kemp had lived in France for many years and had become a passionate, unwavering friend. She was the niece of multimillionaires who constantly claimed to be poor. She always gave her money away, to friends who truly needed it or to opportunists who simply liked to borrow. Her only flaw was confusing one with the other. She believed everyone. At the start of the war, Isabella organized a mutual aid fund in her apartment on the Quai Voltaire. Monumental in height, nobility, and devotion, she did what she could to shoulder France's burdens. She rented an enormous hangar, filled it with cradles, and turned it over to soldiers' wives who needed somewhere to leave their babies while looking for work. The women would place their bundles of belongings anywhere they could. The children, dressed in mismatched clothes, some from municipal shelters, others in pieces made by Parisian couturiers, played, sat quietly on potties eating biscuits, or tore apart plush American teddy bears. This remarkable organization remained unmatched until the day Isabella, against her will, had to leave the country. She was candid about her views and had a sharp sense of humor. One day, while speaking with a friend on the phone, she said, "The general? Oh, I'll wrap him around my finger. I'll play the part of a helpless little girl." It was a reference to a popular song at the time. That supposedly private conversation led to her being summoned by the general to explain her lack of respect for military authority. But when she walked into his office, not quite sure what was going on, the gruff, mustachioed general gave in instantly to her whirlwind of goodwill, and Isabella got everything she needed for the cause. It was Isabella who took me to 457 Madison Avenue, the headquarters of the Committee for the Coordination of French Relief, American Aid to France, AAF. This organization united 15,000 volunteers from 300 associations across every state. It offered help not only to France but to England as well, raising funds to preserve brotherhood and civilization. Anne Morgan, who had founded the association, reigned over it jealously yet nobly. A powerful woman, she had only one mission in life: to help France. During the First World War, she had been in direct contact with the French army, working tirelessly on their behalf. She became friends with many of their leaders, including Marshal Pétain. For this, she was harshly criticized, even insulted, by those who thought otherwise and saw themselves as above reproach. Despite this, she received enormous support from the American government and from French expatriates. Thousands of letters, from prisoners, children, bore witness to the real impact of her organization. When the Marshal died, I met Anne Morgan at the Ritz, where she was having breakfast veiled in black mourning. Sometimes, the world does reward courage and sincerity, but more often, as in Anne Morgan's case, recognition comes only after death. 2 years ago, to the surprise of many of us, she was granted full military honors in the courtyard of Les Invalides. All her friends came, even those who had once criticized her. The Republican Guard stood in formation, offering her the honors due to a hero, and the highest salute, the sound of La Marseillaise. A bronze plaque bearing her name was placed on the famous wall. Such an honor had never before been bestowed on a woman, let alone a foreign one. When I first met Miss Morgan, I didn't yet have a clear project in mind. Still, I was ready to take on any task. I spoke with her and was immediately struck by the force of her personality. Together, we came up with a plan to organize an exhibition of French art and culture for the American public, hosted in her enormous, empty salons. Miss Morgan embraced the idea and gave me full freedom to carry it out. The first exhibit was dedicated to Jean Pages, who, in his paintings, depicted the story of a simple French soldier, from his demobilization to his arrival in New York. The show received tremendous praise and drew people to our cause. French and American volunteers worked anonymously and tirelessly, writers, princesses, servants, drifters, assembling aid packages that, miraculously, always reached the right recipients, without delay or error. That summer, we transformed the rooms into a garden. They served as a backdrop for the exhibit by Malvina Hoffman, a sculptor who had lived in Paris for many years. Her series, titled The People of the World, expressed human solidarity in the same spirit as the 17th century poet John Donne, who wrote, "No man is an island, and the death of any man diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind." It was easy to bring together artists living in the United States at that time. Free of political entanglement, they helped us reassert Paris as the capital of culture. Only one artist refused my invitation. We managed to highlight the continuity of thought and artistic tradition that links generations. We organized a concert series featuring stars like Robert Casadesus on piano, Gabby, his wife, and René Leroy on flute. They joined our cause with passion and trembled at the thought of serving their country. I had never seen such fervent commitment. We aimed to unite everyone who supported us and crafted programs composed entirely of French music, performed by cellist Marcel Hubert, violinist Jeanette Neveu, tenor Giovanni Martinelli with his extraordinary voice, Milstein, and many others. On both sides of the social barricades, the most talented and elegant members of New York society came together for at least an hour to forget their differences and listen to Debussy, Massenet, Puccini, Handel, Bizet, Couperin, César Franck, and Robert Casadesus. Miss Morgan also allowed us to publish a calendar titled France and America, in which I tried to showcase the various creative directions of French writers and artists of the time. For each day, I selected a quote from a French author, or from a foreigner who admired France: Julian Green, André Maurois, André Moraes, Pierre Delaunay, Gontran de Ponson's, Saint-Exupéry, and Robert de Saint-Jean. The calendar was illustrated by artists who had chosen Paris as the center of their inspiration: Erman, Dali, Marcel Duchamp, Erikson, Lipchitz, Leger, Kissling, Lamotte, Wurtz, and many others: Spanish, French, Danish, Peruvian, Hungarian, American. To bridge the past and the future, I thought it would be valuable to stage a modernist, avant-garde exhibit. I turned to Marcel Duchamp, whose famous painting Nude Descending a Staircase had once scandalized the art world. Marcel was a truly unique figure. His work, reduced to brief formulas, captured the very essence of surrealism. After rejecting all other forms of expression, once he felt he had said everything he needed to say, he dedicated himself to chess, and became a master. He agreed to collaborate with me. With great effort, he emerged from his seclusion and got to work. The vast rooms were divided by screens. Paintings were hung behind them. Ropes were strung between the screens, creating a kind of labyrinth, guiding visitors through the work of each artist so they could compare them. On opening day, children played ball underfoot while the crowd, dazzled and confused, took it all in. It was an astonishing sight, the most renowned artists on display, Picasso among them, with works from his 1937-1938 period that had never been shown in America before. The exhibit included around 80 pieces, not just paintings, but surrealist objects as well, and revealed how American culture had begun to influence French artists in exile. It became a sensation. Some Americans who had long ties to Parisian life were also represented. We published a 48-page catalog, a substantial book featuring reproductions of surrealist works, an anthology of mankind's eternal myths, and a series of portraits under the title Compensation. The exhibit was loud, vivid, and exciting. Miss Morgan, pleased by its financial success, nevertheless questioned her own intentions. She decided she lacked dignity. In her view, surrealism could not represent French culture, and she was sincerely shocked. She wandered through the ropes, sneezing and trying to understand, but she did not approve. To cheer her up, I invited Mr. Liu, a well-known expert and dealer of Chinese art. That lifted her spirits a bit, but she insisted that the next exhibit be more conservative. One morning, returning from Princeton where she lived, I found a display board outside, decorated with peacock feathers, which for me, being very superstitious, was always an omen of misfortune. Still, both of us were stubborn and strong-willed. Despite the ominous sign, I continued working on the exhibit. I even organized another one at the Wildenstein Gallery, devoted to materials about childhood illnesses and how to prevent them. But eventually, the time came when too many people wanted to be involved. People who wanted to do more than just pack boxes, but were also less independent than I was. So, while I remained available to the committee, I decided to shift direction in my life and go back to school. I enrolled in Red Cross training and became a nurse's aide. It was a completely new experience for me. Despite all my travels, I had never truly encountered physical suffering. Taking a patient's temperature, treating a burn, bandaging a broken leg, stopping a hemorrhage, reviving a drowning victim. All of it was new and fascinating. I believed there ought to be a law requiring every young person to learn basic first aid, instead of being forced to study endless, outdated subjects with no relevance to modern life. Making a hospital bed, for instance, is a geometric puzzle. It's not easy to get the surface smooth all the way through and the corners perfectly sharp. I had to learn how to pass exams as if I were 10 years old again. I had to take blood samples at the donor bank, prick a finger, collect the blood, test it, and decide whether to accept or reject the donation. The people who were turned away would leave looking devastated and ashamed, like lepers. Eventually, I was assigned to Bellevue Hospital, the place where society's lost souls ended up: hopeless patients, homeless wanderers, alcoholics, and the forgotten. Schiap, once known as the Queen of Fashion, now walked the streets of New York from 6 in the morning until evening in flat cloth shoes, white cotton stockings, and a blue apron. Without a doubt, she looked slightly ridiculous. But what mattered most to her in this new role was that she was acting in the spirit of Professor Bogomolets. No one really knew what Bogomolets' treatment did, but it was said to turn white hair black, or vice versa, to make people appear younger, or to give them the sensation of swelling up like a whale. Whatever it was, the Bogomolets effect gave Schiap courage, and in some way made these hard years bearable. As a nurse's aide, of course, she had to carry out the dirtiest jobs, those normally done by the cleaning staff. But she didn't mind. She brought her full interest to the work, because it restored her self-respect. Washing the bodies of people of every race and skin color, sometimes in the final stages of infection, helping those who could only moan, making beds beneath heavy, motionless bodies, listening to endless complaints amid unbearable smells. All of it returned her to a sense of humanity. It made her feel that she was not just a dead branch tossed around by the hurricane. It saved her soul. For the first time, she came face to face with death. Sent on an errand to a distant wing of the enormous hospital building, she found herself in the morgue. There were rows of coffins embedded in the walls like index cards in a file. Several bodies lay on tables, covered with sheets. Nameplates sat beside them, sometimes part of a face or a foot stuck out from beneath the fabric, and despite the refrigeration system, the smell of decomposition could not be masked by disinfectants. Later, at another hospital in New York, she saw death again. A kind, elderly woman whose hand she was holding died without saying a word. She just gave a faint squeeze of the fingers. A famous surgeon allowed her to observe major operations. She watched as a heart was removed from the chest, still beating, and then placed back inside. She saw ribs sliced away because of tuberculosis. She witnessed tumors removed, enormous as overripe grapefruits. During that period, she stopped eating meat altogether. One day she visited a children's hospital, where they were testing a new treatment for polio. Because of Gogo's illness, Schiap was well acquainted with the horrors of that disease, and she was naturally curious about any possible cure. But she was shocked by the inhumane methods being used. The children were wrapped in wet sheets heated so hot they had to be handled with tongs. The poor little patients screamed until they fainted, but the experiments had to go on. Schiap always believed that the old technique involving electricity had been more effective. At least, it had worked in Gogo's case. And after all of that, after enduring, witnessing, and surviving, she came to a kind of peace.